Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back to Susty Talk. This is Edie's series of conversations with the inspirational leaders who are keeping up the positive momentum in their fields and helping to drive a green recovery through this period of lockdown in the UK. Now, Edie's Net Zero Week is in full swing. On Monday, we connected with Christiana Figueres, and we're keeping that bar at that high level because today I'm delighted to be joined by Jonathon Porritt, the founder director of Forum for the Future. Jonathon's an eminent writer, broadcaster, campaigner on sustainable development, and his efforts led him to being named the Lifetime Achievement Award winner at Edie's Sustainability Leaders Awards back in February, which really does feel like a lifetime ago. Anyway, Jonathon, hello. Thank you for joining us. Where are you joining from, and what's sort of life in lockdown looking like for you at the moment?
Joining from Cheltenham in Gloucestershire. It's a very nice place to have to be locked down, as it were. The weather's been amazing. And I suppose, in a way, I'm coping. So much stuff done on Zoom and Microsoft Teams. This is an exception, obviously, Luke. But so no face-to-face meetings. I'm feeling the wear and tear of that, to be honest. It'll be good to get back to a little bit more human contact, I have to admit.
Yeah, I think we've all reached that kind of that final point, haven't we? After the first few Teams meetings and Microsoft and Zoom meetings, they were quite fun, and then it sort of dies down a little bit, doesn't it? So I wanted to cast your mind back actually to what feels like decades ago, otherwise known as February 2020, when you took to the stage to give your Lifetime Achievement Award acceptance speech. And you said then that this year marks an extraordinarily rare inflection point in the history of humankind. Of course, you weren't at that point referring to this pandemic, but I suppose the point does still stand in that we're now facing two global crises in coronavirus and climate change. So, Jonathon, what do you think the pandemic has done to the global climate movement? Are there still reasons for sustainability professionals to be champions of hope, as you put it, back at the awards ceremony?
There are still good reasons to maintain that kind of expectation that things will change in the not too distant future, but it would be crazy to pretend there hasn't been a real slowing of the momentum around climate change. I mean, it's very noticeable in every corner of the world, really. Some of the initiatives that were leaping forward on different climate-related issues, increased focus in the media, increased focus in professional associations, businesses, etc., in the investment community. Honestly, all of that has gone on to slow, back burner type stuff, and you don't get any of that sense of driven forward momentum that we had then. So we have to be realistic about that. And that's why all of the discussions that are now taking place, very rich, engaged discussions about how we can make the recovery from COVID fit this critical need of today, which is doing everything in a way that is consistent with addressing the climate emergency. That debate is now absolutely front and center. And the good thing is that a lot of companies are still very engaged in that debate, looking at the synergies between a post-COVID recovery period or coming out of COVID recovery period and the climate emergency.
And so in terms of the kind of the direct impacts on global emissions and warming, I suppose there's two ways of looking at things. There's the sort of short-term impacts, and then there's the longer-term impacts and results. In the short term, you probably have seen the International Energy Agency forecasting that emissions are going to be falling by as much as 8% this year as a result of the coronavirus and the lockdowns it's caused. Primarily through the cut in transport, aviation, and reductions in electricity demands and industrial activity. But what's really interesting is that when you look at what we need to be doing to bring the 1.5 degree limit within reach, emissions would need to fall by some 7.6% every year. So even with all of these extreme measures to lock down economies, the emissions would only just be enough, the drop, to see the levels that we'd need as defined within the Paris Agreement. So, long question, but what do you make of that? Do you believe 1.5 is still achievable given what we're seeing at the moment?
It's pretty sobering, isn't it? I think when people said emissions have got to drop by 7.6% per annum for the next decade, everybody said, oh yeah, well, 7.6%, that's okay. And now we're looking at what it has taken to get, as you said, an 8% reduction in emissions. And everyone's saying, bloody hell, if that's what it looks like, we are going to be really, really hard put to get that kind of reduction on an ongoing basis year after year for the next decade. So we have to be realistic about that. We have to be realistic about the fact that after the 2008 crash, emissions came back pretty quickly. It didn't take long for emissions to re-establish themselves at the pre-crash levels. We need to understand the rebound effect in all of this. There are going to be a lot of people who hope that part of the business of getting back to normal is getting back to doing a lot of the things that caused a lot of the emissions. So there's no easy way of squaring this particular circle. The good news, of course, is that we are seeing some changes in behavior, which I think will be lasting. I'm absolutely convinced that we'll never go back to the same level of regular commuting that we had in a country like the UK ever again. I'm not saying everybody's going to work now all the time from home, because they're not. And I seriously hope that that isn't the new working reality for everybody, because I think we still need some of the interaction and the social engagement that workplaces bring. But we're going to see a dramatic reduction in those daily commuting patterns. I'm pretty sure we're going to see a huge reduction in the emissions from aviation over the course of the next, at least the next 2 to 3 years. And I'm not sure what that will build back to in the future. I'm pretty sure we're going to see shifts in the way in which we now look to the global food economy, our dependence on imported food at every turn. I think we're going to look to ways of producing more of our own food here in the UK, build more resilience into our food chains. So there are many, many ways in which we can now lock in the emission reductions that we've seen already in 2020. But the politics of that is going to be really tough. And that's why companies are critical, because they need to be on the right side of the tough politics of that debate.
Well, you covered various aspects of what my next question was going to be in terms of the green recovery, which I mentioned in my introduction. I wanted to ask you what you thought a kind of good green recovery would look like, if there were any particular areas that you thought needed the most focus in order to achieve that, and what role, therefore, businesses need to be playing as we look to recover from COVID.
I think the critical thing for governments anywhere in the world, including the UK, is that as they set about bringing purchasing power back into the economy, a reflation strategy, they need to do that in such a way that they can create good jobs for people off the back of doing the kind of infrastructure changes that we so desperately need. So, for instance, we currently have a commitment to a very large, ambitious road building program that should instantly be dropped. And what we should see is we should start doing a lot more investment in our cities and towns, using urban planning powers to create opportunities to shift cities towards much more public transport, shared car schemes, cycling, walking, that whole portfolio, if you like, of sustainable transport solutions. We urgently need to see reinvestment in the natural economy. I was so pleased to see that the Committee on Climate Change, in its report, flagged up that the government now has an opportunity to do a lot to create new jobs in regenerating nature in this country. And I don't just mean only tree planting, but simply getting back and restoring many of the degraded ecosystems that we've got. And then perhaps most importantly to me is to take the recommendation of the National Infrastructure Commission here in the UK to treat energy efficiency as a strategic infrastructure priority, and to put a massive new investment into first training, then skilling up, then providing jobs for huge numbers of people, including young people who are going to find the labour market intolerably difficult over the next couple of years. Training people to do this retrofit of our existing housing stock, which we've been talking about for 10 years, and very little, some progress has been made, but nothing like the kind of progress that we need. So you need to have opportunities where the building back better bit creates jobs, is demonstrably fair so people can understand that, and meets the needs of an ultra low carbon economy of the future.
Okay, going to have to scroll down because you just answered my next two questions as well. They're covering off the kind of the policy aspects and the business aspects of getting to net zero. But on the net zero carbon point specifically, was there anything else you would like to see happening at a business level as we come out of the crisis? Anything that you'd not covered off there? You mentioned enhanced both efficiency, but should businesses look at going above and beyond that as we come out of this crisis? And if so, how?
Yeah, I mean, we were on a goodish path in terms of corporate commitments on climate. The UK is doing reasonably well on that. Many more companies have signed up to a science-based target approach, which is really good, looking at what it would mean for them to decarbonize to stay below the 1.5 degrees C. They need to stay true to those commitments, and companies that haven't got to those commitments need to get on that page. And again, being realistic about this, we're always talking about the leadership cohort here in the UK. We tend not to talk about the tail of businesses that aren't yet on the low carbon page at all. And to be honest, the focus now needs to be very much on those companies, because they're not taking advantage or getting the advantage of using energy efficiency in order to drive down costs in everything that they do. So I think, again, we've always been clear that this decarbonization journey for companies is wrapped up with business models, with efficiency, with savings, with leadership, all of these kind of things. And I am hoping that the voices of individual companies and of trade associations, business associations, CPI, you name it, that the very strong call is don't use COVID-19 as a reason to slow down what you need to do on decarbonization. If anything, do it the other way around. Use the COVID-19 shock to our system to ensure we don't get another, even more shocking shock to our system through a kind of unraveling around climate stability. And I hope that enough business leaders will be absolutely outspoken about that, using their advocacy, using their voice. There's going to be one hell of a battle going on in Bays, in the business department and in Treasury and in number 10. There are lots of voices in there saying, well, you know, just park that low carbon stuff. We can't do much about that for the time being. We are going to need every single business leader who's expressed an opinion about addressing the climate emergency. We're going to need them out there with the loudest, clearest voice that you can possibly imagine, because there's a real battle ahead, Luke, I have to say, a real battle.
I wanted to pick up on one of the sectors you touched on earlier on in aviation, and to sort of explore where that sits in this concept of a green recovery. Obviously, it's a sector that's been massively impacted by COVID. Passenger flights down by more than 90% now, business travel virtually non-existent, with meeting software like this potentially replacing it almost indefinitely in some respects. In a blog post last week, I saw that you focused on aviation, and you said that it does still have a significant role to play in a global economy post-pandemic. And you said a world without aviation would be a poorer, shrunken, inward-looking world. So when we talk about green recovery and reaching net zero, what does sustainability leadership in aviation look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough one, because I guess aviation is probably the sector that is worst affected in the round, along with many parts of the travel and tourism, but you've always got domestic opportunities there. And the truth of it is that the airlines know they're facing not a 1 year or a 2 year recovery process. They know that to build back is going to take a lot in terms of customer confidence, opportunities to open up borders again, and so on. And that is really difficult for them. And there are going to be a lot of airlines in massive financial problems. So for me, what I've said is, I don't believe we should be talking about this as an opportunity to close down the aviation sector. That doesn't make any sense to me. I can understand why people would sort of go to that place, but I'm not sure whether that's terribly smart, because we have to take into account that millions, hundreds of millions of people who are dependent still in the global economy on travel and tourism, and aviation is critical to that. But the other side of that deal is, and let's be clear about this, most airlines were not doing what they had to do to get their carbon management strategies in place. They were often hiding behind ineffective trade bodies, totally dysfunctional international discussions run by the International Civil Aviation Organization or IATA, whatever it might be. They weren't coming out demonstrating real leadership in this space. And I know that because Forum for the Future has been doing quite a lot of work with Air New Zealand over the last 5 or 6 years. And it's hard for airlines to tell it as it really is, you know, to actually come out and say our emissions may only be accounting for 2, 3, 4% of total global emissions today. But by 2050, emissions from aviation on a business as usual basis will account for 25%. You don't hear many leaders of airlines, business leaders, talk about that. So they're going to have to be absolutely upfront. And then they're going to have to commit to a whole process of changes inside the industry, dramatically accelerate the efficiency argument, the need for sustainable aviation fuels. They've got to get the offsetting piece right. I know not everybody is persuaded that that's the right way out of this conundrum, but I tell you, we're never going to get to a sustainable aviation world without a lot of offsetting along the way. So that has to be done really, really well. So for me, it's a challenge to those leaders now in the industry. Ramp up that commitment. Be completely honest with consumers. Don't hide behind other people. You're in a hole now. One of the ways to get out of the hole is to regain your social license to operate by being completely upfront about what you have to do on the climate emergency.
Okay, thank you. So I'll move into the final question now then, and I just wanted to kind of come back to looking at all of this from the perspective of the people watching this video, the sustainability, CSR and energy professionals who are trying, maybe struggling at points to keep climate and sustainability high on the agenda for the organisations they work for. Do you have any thoughts or advice or tips for those who are trying to kind of keep sustainability going at this time?
Yeah, other than dig in and make it work, it's I guess for me it is going to be really interesting, the mood of the country. What is going to happen once we begin to see how to rebuild a new economy after COVID slackens off or ceases to be quite so impactful as it is now? I don't think it's going to go away for quite some time. It's not just the kind of policy things, and it's not just the business engagement stuff that we need to talk about. There's a very clear change in the mood in this country. There is a realization of how much we owe to different parts of society that previously we discounted the importance of in the NHS and care professions and so on. There is an understanding that far too many people have lived for far too long in abhorrently precarious financial conditions. And business has a role in helping to put a lot of that right. So for me, when people talk about the just transition around climate change, companies are going to have a role to play in that. How do they make sure that fewer of their employees or their suppliers or their business partners are suffering from this kind of precarious economy that we've been through? So I'm hoping that businesses will see the other side of this as an opportunity for really committed leadership, not just on decarbonization, but on building a better country than I think we were before this, and using their voice to talk compassionately and intelligently about fairness and equity in our society. There's got to be a social justice uplift as a consequence of this utter disaster for so many people.
Well, on that point, I'll bring this chat to a close, Jonathon. Thank you so much for your time today. I hope you stay safe and well there, and that we can catch up in person again soon, whenever that may be possible. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. Stay safe, stay positive, and keep up the Susty talk. Goodbye.